They tried to confuse her, but she spoke in 7 languages at once, revealing an international conspiracy that spanned 4 continents and exposing the truth that 12 governments had killed to keep secret. What began as a routine translation assignment would end with Dr. Elena Vasquez becoming the most protected and most hunted woman in the world, armed with nothing but words that could topple nations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The interrogation room in the basement of the federal building in downtown Los Angeles was designed to break the will of the most hardened criminals and foreign agents. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat calmly at the metal table, her hands folded serenely as 5 different intelligence operatives prepared to question her about the assassination of Ambassador Chen Weiming 3 days earlier. They had no idea that the mild-mannered linguistics professor possessed a mental capability that would transform their carefully planned interrogation into a revelation that would shake the foundations of international diplomacy. Elena was 31 years old, a professor of comparative linguistics at UCLA with expertise in 17 different languages and dialects from around the world. Her academic reputation was built on groundbreaking research into the neurological mechanisms that allowed certain individuals to achieve perfect fluency in multiple languages simultaneously. What her colleagues didn't know was that Elena's research was based on her own extraordinary capabilities that went far beyond normal human linguistic processing. The assassination that had brought Elena to the attention of federal investigators had occurred during a high-level diplomatic reception at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Ambassador Chen, representing the People's Republic of China in sensitive trade negotiations, had collapsed and died within minutes of consuming a glass of wine at the international gathering. Initial toxicology reports indicated poisoning by a rare compound that suggested professional assassination by someone with access to advanced chemical weapons. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena had been working as a simultaneous interpreter at the reception, providing real-time translation services for diplomats speaking Mandarin Chinese, Russian, Arabic, French, Spanish, German, and Portuguese. Her position had given her access to conversations between representatives from multiple nations, many of whom were discussing topics far more sensitive than trade agreements and cultural exchanges. She had been one of the last people to speak with Ambassador Chen before his death. The investigation had initially focused on identifying foreign agents who might have infiltrated the diplomatic gathering, but Elena's linguistic abilities had allowed her to overhear conversations that revealed a much more complex conspiracy. She had listened to discussions in multiple languages that suggested Ambassador Chen's death was connected to his investigation into illegal arms sales, money laundering operations, and human trafficking networks that involved officials from several different countries. Agent Michael Rodriguez of the FBI led the interrogation team, accompanied by CIA operative Sarah Kim, NSA analyst David Park, Defense Intelligence Agency specialist Lisa Chen, and Homeland Security investigator Maria Santos. Each agent represented different aspects of the government's interest in Elena's testimony, but they all shared the assumption that a university professor could be easily manipulated into revealing whatever information she possessed about the ambassador's murder. The questioning began with standard protocols designed to establish Elena's credibility and determine the extent of her knowledge about the events at the diplomatic reception. Agent Rodriguez asked carefully prepared questions in English, expecting straightforward answers that would either implicate foreign agents or eliminate Elena as a person of interest in the assassination investigation. His experience with witness interviews had taught him that academics were usually eager to cooperate with law enforcement. Elena's initial responses followed the expected pattern, providing detailed accounts of her work at the reception and her interactions with various diplomatic personnel. She described her translation duties, the conversations she had facilitated between different delegations, and her observations about the general atmosphere of the gathering. Her answers were precise and professionally delivered, giving no indication of the linguistic storm that was building in her mind. The first sign that the interrogation was not proceeding according to plan came when Agent Kim attempted to question Elena about specific conversations she might have overheard between Chinese and Russian diplomats. Kim's questions were designed to test Elena's honesty about her understanding of sensitive diplomatic discussions, but they also revealed the government's knowledge of classified information that Elena wasn't supposed to possess. Elena's response was to begin speaking simultaneously in 7 different languages, creating a cascade of words that overwhelmed the translation equipment and left the interpreter struggling to understand what was happening. Her voice remained calm and controlled, but she was delivering different information in each language, creating a complex narrative that revealed connections between Ambassador Chen's death and a vast international conspiracy. In Mandarin Chinese, Elena described conversations she had overheard about illegal weapons shipments from North Korea to terrorist organizations in the Middle East. In Russian, she detailed discussions about money laundering operations that moved billions of dollars through banks in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. In Arabic, she revealed plans for human trafficking networks that supplied forced labor to construction projects in Qatar and Dubai. The French portions of her multilingual revelation exposed corruption within the European Union's trade negotiations, while her Spanish commentary described drug trafficking operations that involved officials from several Latin American governments. The German segments revealed industrial espionage activities targeting clean energy technologies, and her Portuguese statements outlined illegal mining operations in Brazil that were destroying indigenous communities. Each language stream contained information that was directly relevant to Ambassador Chen's investigation into international criminal activities, but the simultaneous delivery made it impossible for the interrogation team to process the information effectively. Elena's linguistic capabilities had transformed her from a witness into a living database of classified intelligence that she was revealing in a format that protected her from immediate comprehension by her interrogators. The psychological impact on the interrogation team was immediate and profound. Agent Rodriguez found himself unable to focus on any single language stream, his brain overwhelmed by the complexity of Elena's multilingual delivery. The other agents were experiencing similar difficulties, their training and interrogation techniques proving useless against someone who could weaponize language itself as a form of cognitive warfare. Elena's demonstration lasted exactly 7 minutes before she returned to speaking only English, calmly asking if the agents had any other questions about her experiences at the diplomatic reception. The sudden silence that followed her linguistic performance was broken only by the sound of recording equipment that had overheated trying to process the multiple language streams simultaneously. Dr. Elena Vasquez had discovered her extraordinary linguistic abilities during her graduate studies at MIT, where her research into the neurological basis of language acquisition had revealed that her brain processed multiple languages simultaneously rather than switching between them sequentially like most polyglots. What began as academic curiosity about her own capabilities had evolved into a carefully guarded secret that allowed her to access information that others believed was safely hidden behind language barriers. Elena's childhood in East Los Angeles had exposed her to Spanish, English, and Mandarin Chinese through her multicultural neighborhood and her parents' work as international trade representatives. Her natural aptitude for languages had been evident from an early age, but her teachers had dismissed her claims about hearing multiple conversations simultaneously as childhood imagination, rather than recognizing the signs of an exceptional neurological gift. The development of Elena's abilities had accelerated during her undergraduate studies at Berkeley, where she had enrolled in courses taught in 6 different languages simultaneously. While other students struggled to maintain fluency in their second or third languages, Elena found that exposure to multiple linguistic environments actually enhanced her comprehension and speaking abilities across all languages. Her professors had attributed this success to exceptional dedication rather than understanding the unique way her brain processed linguistic information. Elena's doctoral dissertation had focused on individuals who could maintain perfect fluency in more than 10 languages, a phenomenon that occurred in less than 1% of the global population. Her research had involved extensive neurological testing, brain imaging studies, and cognitive analysis that revealed the structural differences that enabled hyperpolyglot abilities. What she hadn't disclosed to her academic supervisors was that her research subjects included herself, and that her own capabilities exceeded anything documented in the scientific literature. The breakthrough that had led to Elena's current situation had occurred 6 months earlier when she had been recruited by the State Department to provide translation services for high-level diplomatic negotiations. Her security clearance had given her access to classified communications in multiple languages, and her unique abilities had allowed her to detect patterns and connections that individual translators working on separate language streams would never have noticed. Elena had begun to realize that her position as a translator made her a passive observer of information that powerful people assumed was safely compartmentalized by language barriers. Diplomatic communications that seemed innocuous when analyzed in individual languages revealed sinister patterns when Elena's brain processed them simultaneously. She had discovered that international criminal organizations were using linguistic isolation as a security measure, conducting different aspects of their operations in different languages to prevent comprehensive understanding by law enforcement or intelligence agencies. The assassination of Ambassador Chen had been the culmination of Elena's growing awareness that she had stumbled onto something far more dangerous than academic research or routine diplomatic translation. Chen had been investigating the same international criminal networks that Elena had been monitoring through her translation work, and his death had been ordered by people who knew that his investigation was approaching breakthrough discoveries that could expose their operations. Elena's unique position as a hyperpolyglot translator had made her the only person capable of understanding the full scope of the conspiracy that had killed Ambassador Chen. The criminal networks involved in arms trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking had been operating under the assumption that their use of multiple languages and cultural barriers would prevent comprehensive analysis of their activities. They had not anticipated encountering someone who could process all of their communications simultaneously. The evidence that Elena possessed was not contained in documents or recordings but rather in her memory of thousands of conversations, communications, and documents that she had translated over the course of her 6-month assignment with the State Department. Her brain had been unconsciously assembling these linguistic fragments into a comprehensive understanding of criminal activities that spanned multiple continents and involved officials from numerous governments. Agent Rodriguez and his interrogation team were beginning to realize that Elena's multilingual performance had not been a psychological breakdown or an attempt to confuse their investigation, but rather a deliberate revelation of information that she believed they needed to understand. Her simultaneous delivery in 7 languages had been a test to determine whether the federal agents were genuinely interested in uncovering the truth about Ambassador Chen's death or were part of the cover-up efforts. The recording equipment that had captured Elena's multilingual revelation was being analyzed by teams of translators and intelligence analysts who were working to decode the information she had provided in each language stream. The preliminary analysis suggested that Elena possessed knowledge of criminal activities that were significantly more extensive and dangerous than anything the federal government had previously suspected. Elena's academic background had provided her with an understanding of how language could be used as both a weapon and a shield in intelligence operations. Her research into the psychology of multilingual communication had taught her that simultaneous delivery of information in multiple languages could overwhelm cognitive processing in ways that provided protection against immediate retaliation, while ensuring that the information would eventually be understood by people with appropriate linguistic resources. The decision to reveal her information through multilingual performance had been a calculated risk based on Elena's assessment that the federal agents interrogating her were genuinely interested in justice rather than cover-up. Her academic training had taught her to analyze behavioral patterns and communication styles, skills that she had applied to evaluate the motivations and loyalties of the people questioning her about Ambassador Chen's death. Elena's capabilities extended beyond simple translation to include cultural analysis, psychological profiling, and pattern recognition across multiple linguistic and cultural systems simultaneously. These skills had made her invaluable to diplomatic operations, but they had also made her extremely dangerous to criminal organizations that relied on linguistic barriers to protect their activities from comprehensive analysis. The federal investigation into Ambassador Chen's assassination was beginning to transform into something much larger and more complex as analysts worked to understand the implications of Elena's multilingual revelations. The information she had provided suggested that the ambassador's death was connected to criminal networks that posed threats to national security and international stability far beyond anything indicated by the initial investigation. Elena remained calm and cooperative throughout the continued questioning, providing additional details about specific conversations and documents that supported the information she had revealed through her multilingual performance. Her demeanor suggested confidence that the truth would ultimately protect her, but also awareness that the people responsible for Ambassador Chen's death would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened their operations. The interrogation team was faced with the challenge of protecting a witness whose knowledge made her incredibly valuable to law enforcement but also incredibly dangerous to criminal organizations with the resources and motivation to eliminate threats to their security. Elena's linguistic abilities had made her a living repository of intelligence that could not be easily transferred to other investigators or protected through conventional witness security measures. The analysis of Elena's multilingual revelation required the FBI to assemble the largest translation team in the agency's history, bringing together native speakers of 7 languages and cultural experts who could interpret the subtle contextual meanings that Elena had embedded in her simultaneous delivery. Dr. James Mitchell, the FBI's chief linguist, had never encountered anything like Elena's performance and was struggling to understand how a single individual could process and deliver such complex information across multiple language systems without confusion or error. The Mandarin Chinese portions of Elena's revelation contained detailed information about a weapons trafficking network that supplied North Korean armaments to terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East and Africa. Elena had overheard conversations between Chinese diplomatic personnel and arms dealers that revealed specific shipment schedules, payment methods, and delivery locations that had been planned during legitimate diplomatic gatherings. The level of detail suggested that Elena had been unconsciously memorizing intelligence-grade information for months. Agent Kim's analysis of the Russian language segments revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation that moved criminal proceeds through banks in Switzerland, Cyprus, and the Cayman Islands using diplomatic immunity and international trade agreements as cover. The conversations Elena had translated included specific account numbers, transaction amounts, and the names of government officials who were facilitating the illegal financial transfers. The information provided a roadmap for tracking billions of dollars in criminal. The Arabic components of Elena's multilingual performance exposed human trafficking networks that supplied forced labor for construction projects in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, with additional operations providing victims for organ harvesting and sexual exploitation throughout the Middle East. Elena's translation work had given her access to communications between trafficking coordinators and their government contacts that revealed the scope and brutality of operations that had been hidden behind legitimate construction and development projects. Dr. Park's analysis of the French language streams revealed corruption within the European Union's trade negotiation processes, with several EU officials accepting bribes to manipulate regulatory decisions that favored criminal enterprises over legitimate businesses. Elena had translated conversations that detailed specific instances of regulatory capture, including environmental assessments that had been falsified to permit illegal industrial operations throughout Europe. The Spanish portions of Elena's revelation documented drug trafficking operations that involved high-ranking officials from Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, and several Central American governments. The information included details about transportation routes, protection payments to law enforcement agencies, and coordination between drug cartels and terrorist organizations that were using narcotics trafficking to fund weapons purchases and operational expenses. Agent Santos's analysis of the German language segments exposed industrial espionage activities targeting clean energy technologies, with German and Austrian companies stealing research from American and Japanese firms to gain advantages in renewable energy markets. Elena had translated conversations about specific technologies, research facilities, and the identities of scientists who had been targeted for recruitment or elimination by industrial espionage teams. The Portuguese components of Elena's multilingual performance revealed illegal mining operations in Brazil that were destroying indigenous communities and protected environmental areas while providing rare earth minerals to electronics manufacturers throughout Asia and Europe. The conversations Elena had accessed included details about environmental cover-ups, indigenous community relocations, and the assassination of environmental activists who had threatened to expose the operations. Agent Rodriguez realized that Elena's information represented the most comprehensive intelligence breakthrough in the FBI's history, providing evidence of criminal activities that spanned multiple agencies' jurisdictions and required international cooperation to investigate effectively. The scope of the criminal networks that Elena had exposed made it clear that Ambassador Chen's assassination had been ordered to prevent exactly the kind of revelations that Elena was now providing to federal investigators. The challenge facing the federal investigation was determining which government agencies and international organizations could be trusted with Elena's intelligence. Her revelations had implicated officials from multiple countries and international institutions. The criminal networks that Elena had exposed included people with access to classified information and the ability to manipulate law enforcement investigations, making it essential to carefully control the distribution of her intelligence. Elena's academic background in linguistics and cultural analysis had provided her with insights into the psychological and social mechanisms that enabled international criminal organizations to operate across multiple cultural and linguistic boundaries. Her research had taught her to recognize patterns of behavior and communication that indicated coordination between seemingly unrelated criminal activities in different countries and regions. The multilingual delivery method that Elena had chosen for revealing her intelligence had been carried out to protect her from immediate retaliation while ensuring that the information would eventually reach investigators who could act on it effectively. Her understanding of cognitive psychology had informed her decision to overwhelm her interrogators initially, giving her time to assess their motivations and loyalties before providing more detailed information. Elena's revelations were triggering emergency meetings at the highest levels of government as officials struggled to understand the implications of criminal networks that had penetrated internal, diplomatic, and trade systems. The National Security Council was convening special sessions to coordinate responses to threats that crossed traditional agency boundaries and required unprecedented levels of international cooperation. The protection of Elena became a critical national security priority. Federal agencies realized that her knowledge made her the most valuable intelligence asset in American custody, but also the most likely target for assassination. A criminal organization with global reach and virtually unlimited resources. Traditional witness protection methods were inadequate for someone whose linguistic abilities made her irreplaceable as an ongoing intelligence source. Elena's cooperation with the federal investigation was contingent on her demand that the information she provided be used to protect the victims of the criminal networks she exposed, particularly the human trafficking victims and the indigenous communities threatened by illegal mining operations. Her academic background had instilled in her a commitment to social justice that extended beyond simple laws form to include humanitarian protection for vulnerable populations. The international implications of Elena's revelation were becoming apparent as foreign governments began requesting information about criminal activities that involved their citizens or occurred within their territories. The State Department was coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to develop prosecution strategies that effectively target criminal networks operating across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Elena's unique position as a hyper-polyglot translator
provided her with access to intelligence that no traditional investigation could have gathered, demonstrating the vulnerability of criminal organizations that relied on linguistic barriers for operational security. Her case was revolutionizing the understanding of how language could be used both an intelligence gathering tool and a weapon against international criminal enterprises.
Within 72 hours of Elena's multilingual revelation, emergency sessions were convening at the United Nations, Interpol headquarters, and intelligence agencies across 4 continents, as the scope of her intelligence forced governments to confront criminal networks that had been operating with impunity for decades. Secretary General Maria Rodriguez called for an unprecedented international coordination meeting, bringing together law enforcement leaders, diplomatic officials, and intelligence specialists who had never before collaborated on such a massive scale. The Chinese government's response to Elena's revelations about weapons trafficking was swift and decisive, with President Li Wei ordering the immediate arrest of 12 diplomatic personnel and the seizure of assets belonging to arms dealers who had been operating under official protection. The public acknowledgement of corruption within China's diplomatic corps represented a dramatic shift in policy for a government that typically denied any internal criminal activity, but the specificity of Elena's intelligence made denial impossible. European Union officials were grappling with Elena's exposures of corruption within their trade negotiation processes, with several commissioners announcing their resignations and the European Parliament launching emergency investigations into regulatory capture by criminal enterprises. The revelations threatened the fundamental credibility of EU institutions and forced member nations to reconsider their participation in trade agreements that had been compromised by criminal influence. The Russian Federation's response was characteristically defensive, with Foreign Minister Dmitry Volkov claiming that Elena's intelligence was fabricated by American agencies to damage Russia's international reputation. However, Swiss banking authorities had already begun freezing accounts identified in Elena's Russian language revelations, and the Financial Action Task Force was coordinating investigations into money laundering operations that involved Russian diplomatic personnel and government officials. Latin American governments were experiencing political upheaval as Elena's Spanish-language intelligence triggered public protests and calls for the resignation of officials implicated in drug trafficking operations. Colombian President Carlos Mendez declared a state of emergency and announced the formation of a special anti-corruption task force, while Mexican authorities began arresting cartel leaders, whose names had appeared in Elena's revelations about government coordination with drug trafficking organizations. The Middle Eastern governments mentioned in Elena's Arabic language intelligence were attempting to control the narrative by claiming that human trafficking operations were conducted by criminal organizations without official knowledge or support. However, international human rights organizations were already documenting evidence that corroborated Elena's revelations about government involvement in forced labor and organ trafficking networks. Brazilian environmental agencies were facing international pressure to investigate the illegal mining operations that Elena had exposed through her Portuguese language revelations, with indigenous rights organizations demanding immediate action to protect communities threatened by criminal mining enterprises. The Brazilian government's initial denials were undermined by satellite imagery and environmental studies that confirmed the existence of illegal operations in protected areas. Intelligence agencies in Germany and Austria were conducting internal investigations to identify the industrial espionage networks that Elena had exposed, with several technology companies already reporting evidence of intellectual property theft that matched the patterns described in her German language revelations. The European technology sector was implementing emergency security measures to protect research facilities and personnel from further espionage activities. Dr. Elena Vasquez found herself at the center of an international storm that exceeded anything she had anticipated when she decided to reveal her intelligence through multilingual performance. Federal agents had moved her to a secure facility where she was providing detailed briefings to investigators from multiple agencies while also receiving protection from assassination attempts that intelligence agencies considered inevitable given the scope of her revelations. The challenge of coordinating international law enforcement responses to Elena's intelligence required unprecedented cooperation between agencies that had traditionally operated independently or as competitors. Interpol Director Sarah Chen was establishing new protocols for sharing intelligence across multiple jurisdictions while protecting sources and methods that individual agencies considered classified. Elena's linguistic abilities were proving invaluable for ongoing investigations as she provided real-time translation and cultural analysis that helped investigators understand the behavioral patterns and operational methods of international criminal organizations. Her academic expertise in comparative linguistics was being applied to develop new techniques for detecting criminal coordination across language barriers. The assassination attempts against Elena began within a week of her revelations becoming known to international law enforcement agencies, with professional killers attempting to infiltrate the secure facility where she was being protected. The sophistication of these attempts confirmed that criminal organizations possessed intelligence capabilities and financial resources that exceeded many government agencies' operational capacities. Elena's demands for protection of trafficking victims and indigenous communities were forcing governments to allocate resources for humanitarian operations that had not been previously prioritized by law enforcement agencies focused primarily on prosecution rather than victim assistance. International humanitarian organizations were coordinating with law enforcement to provide emergency assistance to vulnerable populations identified through Elena's intelligence. The media coverage of Elena's revelations was creating public pressure for government accountability and international cooperation that was forcing political leaders to take more aggressive action against criminal networks than they had previously been willing to pursue. Investigative journalists were using Elena's intelligence as a foundation for exposing additional criminal activities that had not been directly revealed in her multilingual performance. Elena's transformation from an academic translator to a crucial intelligence asset was reshaping understanding of how linguistic expertise could be applied to international law enforcement and national security operations. Intelligence agencies were beginning to recruit hyperpolyglot individuals specifically for their ability to detect patterns and connections across multiple language systems simultaneously. The criminal organizations that Elena had exposed were adapting their operational security in response to the realization that linguistic barriers were no longer reliable protection against intelligence gathering. Communications intercepts were revealing efforts to develop new encryption methods and communication protocols that could resist analysis by individuals with Elena's capabilities. Elena's case was establishing new precedents for international cooperation in protecting witnesses whose intelligence had global implications, with multiple governments contributing resources to ensure her safety while also gaining access to her ongoing analytical capabilities. The protection operation was becoming a model for future cases involving intelligence assets with international significance. The long-term implications of Elena's revelations were beginning to reshape international law enforcement strategy, with agencies developing new approaches to targeting criminal networks that operated across multiple linguistic and cultural boundaries. Elena's unique capabilities had provided a roadmap for understanding how globalized criminal enterprises could be effectively investigated and dismantled through comprehensive linguistic analysis. The true extent of Ambassador Chen Weiming's investigation became clear as Elena provided detailed analysis of conversations she had translated during the weeks preceding his assassination, revealing that Chen had been systematically gathering evidence of the same criminal networks that Elena's multilingual revelation had exposed to federal investigators. Chen's diplomatic position had given him access to classified communications and confidential meetings where criminal conspirators had discussed their operations with a false sense of security about linguistic barriers protecting their secrets. Chen had been investigating arms trafficking networks for 8 months before his death, using his diplomatic immunity to travel between countries and gather intelligence about weapons shipments from North Korea to terrorist organizations in Syria, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Elena's translation of Chinese diplomatic communications revealed that Chen had identified specific shipping routes, financial transfer methods, and the identities of Chinese officials who were facilitating the illegal arms trade in exchange for personal profit and political advancement. The ambassador's money laundering investigation had focused on Swiss banks that were processing criminal proceeds through accounts protected by diplomatic immunity and international banking secrecy laws. Elena's analysis of conversations between Chinese and Russian officials showed that Chen had obtained account numbers, transaction records, and the names of government officials who were using diplomatic credentials to move billions of dollars in criminal assets through the international financial system. Elena's linguistic expertise allowed her to recognize that Chen had been conducting parallel investigations in multiple languages, gathering evidence from Arabic, French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish diplomatic sources that he was planning to compile into a comprehensive report on international criminal networks. His approach had been similar to Elena's unconscious pattern recognition, but Chen had been deliberately coordinating his investigation across multiple linguistic and cultural systems. The human trafficking evidence that Chen had been gathering focused on diplomatic personnel who were using their official immunity to transport victims across international borders without inspection or documentation. Elena's translation of diplomatic communications revealed that Chen had documented specific instances of trafficking operations, including the identities of victims, their countries of origin, and the diplomatic facilities that had been used to transport them to destinations where they would be exploited for forced labor or sexual exploitation. Chen's investigation into industrial espionage had revealed that Chinese intelligence services were coordinating with criminal organizations to steal technology from American and European companies, with the stolen research being used to develop competing products that were manufactured using forced labor in facilities that violated international human rights standards. Elena's analysis showed that Chen had been preparing to expose this coordination to international law enforcement agencies. The environmental crimes that Chen had been investigating included illegal mining operations in Brazil that were providing rare earth minerals to Chinese electronics manufacturers while destroying indigenous communities and protected environmental areas. Elena's translation work revealed that Chen had been documenting the connection between environmental destruction and the technology supply chains that supported major international corporations.
Doctor
Mitchell's analysis of Elena's linguistic patterns revealed that she had been unconsciously processing and remembering Chen's investigation materials during their conversations at diplomatic events, creating a comprehensive backup of his research that existed only in her hyperpolyglot memory. Elena's brain had been functioning as a living archive of Chen's intelligence gathering, preserving evidence that the assassins had believed they had destroyed with his death. The timing of Chen's assassination had been carefully planned to occur before he could present his findings to international law enforcement agencies. But the conspirators had not anticipated that Elena's linguistic abilities would preserve his research and ultimately reveal it to federal investigators. The assassination had actually triggered the exposure that it was designed to prevent, demonstrating the criminal organization's incomplete understanding of Elena's capability. Elena's reconstruction of Chen's investigation revealed that the ambassador had been aware of the danger he faced and had taken precautions to protect his research, including the creation of encrypted backup files that were hidden in diplomatic communications between Chinese embassies in different countries. The location of these backup files was contained in conversations that Elena had translated, providing federal investigators with additional evidence to support her multilingual revelations. The assassination method used to kill Chen had been specifically chosen to appear like a natural death, with the rare poison creating symptoms that resembled a heart attack or stroke rather than obvious homicide. Elena's analysis of conversations about Chen's death revealed that the assassins had been professionals employed by criminal organizations with access to sophisticated chemical weapons and the expertise to use them without detection. Federal investigators were beginning to understand that Elena's position as a translator had made her an inadvertent intelligence asset who had been gathering evidence about international criminal networks without realizing the significance of the information she was processing. Her hyperpolyglot abilities had made her brain a repository for thousands of incriminating conversations and documents that criminal organizations had assumed were safely hidden behind language barriers. The protection of Elena became even more critical as investigators realized that she possessed not only her own intelligence about criminal networks, but also
also the preserved evidence from Chen's investigation that the assassins believed they had successfully eliminated.
Elena's memory contained the most comprehensive
Evidence of international criminal activity that law enforcement agencies had ever accessed, making her irreplaceable as a witness and an ongoing intelligence source.
Elena's cooperation with federal investigators was enabling the reconstruction of Chen's complete investigation, including evidence about criminal activities
that Elena had not directly observed, but that Chen had documented through his diplomatic access to classified information.
The combination of Elena's linguistic intelligence and Chen's investigative evidence was
creating a comprehensive case against criminal networks that had previously operated with impunity.
The revelation that Chen's assassination had been ordered to prevent the exposure of international criminal networks was transforming the federal investigation from a murder case into a comprehensive operation targeting organized crime enterprises with global reach and government-level resources. Elena's multilingual revelations had accomplished exactly what Chen's
assassins had killed to prevent, demonstrating the ultimate failure of their operational security.
Elena's analysis of conversations about Chen's assassination
revealed the identities of the people who had ordered his death, including government officials, criminal organization leaders, and the professional assassins who had carried out the operation.
This information was providing federal investigators with specific targets for prosecution and enabling international law enforcement agencies to coordinate arrests across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. The professional assassination teams deployed to eliminate Elena represented the most sophisticated and well-funded killers that international criminal organizations could recruit, including former intelligence operatives, military special forces personnel, and contract killers, with access to advanced weapons and surveillance technology. The bounty placed on Elena's life exceeded $50 million, making her the most valuable target in the global assassination market and attracting killers from every continent. Elena's protection detail had been assembled from elite personnel representing multiple federal agencies with FBI tactical specialists, Secret Service agents, CIA security experts, and military special operations forces, creating the most comprehensive witness protection operation in American history. The secure facility where Elena was being housed had been designed to withstand attacks by foreign military forces, but her protectors were discovering that criminal organizations possessed capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of many national governments. The first assassination attempt occurred during Elena's transfer between secure facilities with snipers positioned along the route attempting to eliminate her motorcade using armor-piercing ammunition and explosive devices. The attack was coordinated with precision that suggested military-level planning and access to intelligence about federal security protocols that should have been classified. Elena's survival was attributed to last-minute rule changes that had been implemented specifically because of concerns about information leaks within law enforcement agencies. Elena's linguistic abilities were being used not only to provide intelligence about criminal networks but also to
analyze intercepted communications between assassination teams that were coordinating their attacks in multiple languages to avoid detection by conventional intelligence monitoring.
Elena's hyperpolyglot capabilities allowed her to detect patterns and coordination signals that individual language specialists would have missed, providing her protection detail with advance warning about planned attacks. The second assassination attempt involved infiltration of the secure facility by operatives disguised as maintenance personnel, cleaning staff and food service workers who had been recruited or replaced by criminal organizations with access to sophisticated identity manipulation resources. Elena's survival depended on security protocols that required multilingual authentication procedures that she had designed specifically to detect imposters who might possess native-level fluency in multiple languages simultaneously. Elena's analysis of assassination communications revealed
that criminal organizations were coordinating their attacks through a network of professional killers who specialized in eliminating high-value intelligence assets, witnesses,
and law enforcement personnel who threatened organized crime operations.
The level of coordination suggested that international criminal enterprises possessed their own intelligence agencies with capabilities that competed with national security organizations. The third assassination attempt utilized chemical weapons deployed through the facility's air conditioning system, with assassins attempting to deliver lethal gases that would kill Elena while avoiding detection by conventional security measures. Elena's survival was ensured by environmental monitoring systems that had been installed specifically to detect the rare compounds that had been used to assassinate Ambassador Chen, demonstrating that her protectors had learned from the ambassador's death. Elena's ongoing intelligence analysis was revealing additional targets for assassination as criminal organizations attempted to eliminate everyone who possessed knowledge about their operations, including government officials, law enforcement personnel, and civilian witnesses who had been exposed to incriminating information. The assassination campaign was expanding beyond Elena to include dozens of potential targets across multiple countries, forcing international law enforcement agencies to coordinate protection operations on an unprecedented scale. The fourth assassination attempt involved cyber warfare attempts designed to disable the security systems protecting Elena's facility while simultaneously launching physical assaults that would overwhelm her protection detail. The coordination between digital and kinetic attacks demonstrated that criminal organizations possessed integrated warfare capabilities that exceeded those available to many military forces, suggesting that they were employing former intelligence operatives and military personnel at senior levels. Elena's linguistic expertise was being applied to develop new communication protocols for her protection detail that utilized rapid language switching and cultural code references that would be impossible for infiltrators to replicate without extensive training in multiple linguistic systems. These protocols were based on Elena's research into the neurological mechanisms that enabled hyperpolyglot abilities, creating security measures that exploited the rarity of her linguistic capabilities. The fifth assassination attempt represented the most sophisticated operation yet encountered, with criminal organizations deploying multiple teams using advanced technology, military tactics, and intelligence capabilities that suggested coordination at the level of national security operations. The attack was repelled only through the intervention of military special operations forces that had been secretly taught to supplement Elena's protection detail, indicating that the threat level had escalated beyond conventional law enforcement capabilities. Elena's analysis of assassination communications was revealing that criminal organizations were becoming increasingly desperate as her intelligence continued to expose their operations and enable law enforcement actions that were disrupting their activities across multiple continents. The escalating sophistication of assassination attempts reflected the enormous financial losses that criminal enterprises were experiencing as a result of Elena's revelations and the law enforcement operations they had triggered. The international implications of the assassination campaign were forcing governments to acknowledge that criminal organizations possess capabilities that threaten national security and required military-level responses rather than conventional law enforcement approaches. Elena's case was establishing new precedents for protecting witnesses whose intelligence had strategic importance that exceeded traditional criminal prosecution priorities. Elena's transformation from academic translator to the most protected person in the world was demonstrating the vulnerability of globalized criminal networks to comprehensive linguistic analysis, but also revealing the extraordinary resources that such organizations would deploy to protect their operations from exposure. Her survival had become a test of whether democratic governments possess the capability and determination to protect witnesses against criminal enterprises with unlimited financial resources and sophisticated operational capabilities. The evolution of Elena's protection operation was requiring constant adaptation to new threats and attack methods as criminal organizations demonstrated their ability to learn from failed assassination attempts and develop increasingly sophisticated approaches to eliminating targets who threatened their securities. Elena's linguistic analysis was providing her protectors with the intelligence needed to anticipate and counter these evolving threats, but the arms race between protection and assassination was escalating beyond anything previously encountered in law enforcement history. Elena's continuing survival was enabled by ongoing intelligence operations that were systematically dismantling criminal networks across multiple continents, but each success was triggering more desperate and dangerous assassination attempts as criminal organizations recognized that her elimination was essential for their long-term survival. The global stakes of her protection operation were transforming Elena from a witness into a strategic asset whose life had implications for international security and the rule of law.
Operation Polyglot, the largest coordinated international law enforcement action in history, was launched simultaneously across 37 countries as Elena's intelligence enabled authorities to target criminal networks with unprecedented precision and coordination. FBI Director Sarah Chen coordinated with Interpol, Europol, and national police agencies from 6 continents to execute over 800 arrests within a 12-hour window, dismantling criminal enterprises that had operated with impunity for decades. Elena's role in Operation Polyglot extended beyond providing initial intelligence to include real-time linguistic analysis of intercepted communications as criminal organizations attempted to coordinate their responses to law enforcement actions. Her hyper-polyglot abilities allowed her to monitor conversations in 17 different languages simultaneously, providing tactical intelligence that enabled law enforcement agencies to adapt their operations as criminals attempted to escape or retaliate against police actions. The arrests in China focused on government officials and arms dealers who had been facilitating weapons trafficking from North Korea to terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East and Africa. Chinese authorities, working with American intelligence agencies, seized weapons shipments worth over $2 billion and arrested 43 individuals, including diplomatic personnel who had been using their immunity to coordinate illegal arms transfers. The operation represented unprecedented cooperation between Chinese and American law enforcement agencies. European Union authorities executed coordinated arrests across 12 member countries, targeting corruption networks that had been manipulating trade negotiations and regulatory decisions to benefit criminal enterprises. The operation resulted in the arrest of 7 EU commissioners, 23 regulatory officials, and over 100 business executives who had been participating in systematic corruption that had compromised the integrity of European economic institutions. Russian authorities, despite their government's initial denials about Elena's revelations, cooperated with international banking investigations that resulted in the seizure of over $15 billion in criminal assets from Swiss, Cypriot, and Cayman Islands banks. The operation required unprecedented cooperation between Russian law enforcement agencies and Western intelligence services, demonstrating that Elena's intelligence had exposed criminal activities that transcended traditional geopolitical boundaries. Latin American governments coordinated operations that resulted in the arrest of cartel leaders and government officials across 7 countries, with Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela conducting joint operations that seized drug processing facilities, transportation networks, and billions of dollars in criminal proceeds. Middle Eastern governments, working with international human rights organizations, conducted operations that rescued over 3,000 human trafficking victims from forced labor operations in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The operations also resulted in the arrest of trafficking coordinators and government officials who had been facilitating the exploitation of victims from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Brazilian authorities, supported by international environmental organizations, conducted operations that shut down illegal mining operations in protected areas and arrested over 200 individuals involved in the destruction of indigenous communities and environmental protected areas. The operations rescued hundreds of indigenous people who had been forced from their traditional lands and were being used as forced labor in mining operations. German and Austrian authorities conducted joint operations targeting industrial espionage networks that had been stealing clean energy technology from American and Japanese companies. The operations resulted in the arrest of 73 individuals, including intelligence operatives, corporate executives, and researchers who had been participating in systematic theft of intellectual property worth billions of dollars. Elena's linguistic analysis during Operation Polyglot revealed that criminal organizations were attempting to coordinate their responses to law enforcement actions using coded communications in multiple languages. But her hyperpolyglot abilities allowed her to detect these coordination attempts and provide real-time intelligence to law enforcement agencies. Her analysis prevented several planned retaliation attacks against law enforcement personnel and enabled the capture of additional criminals who had initially evaded arrest. The success of Operation Polyglot was generating secondary effects as criminal organizations attempted to reorganize their operations in response to the massive disruption of their networks. Elena's ongoing linguistic analysis was revealing these reorganization efforts and enabling law enforcement agencies to target emerging criminal enterprises before they could establish operational security. Her intelligence was creating a continuous cycle of disruption that prevented criminal organizations from adapting to law enforcement pressure. The international cooperation required for Operation Polyglot was establishing new protocols for sharing intelligence and coordinating law enforcement actions across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Elena's case was demonstrating the importance of linguistic expertise in understanding global criminal networks and was leading to the recruitment of additional hyperpolyglot translators for international law enforcement agencies. The media coverage of Operation Polyglot was creating public awareness of the scope and sophistication of international criminal networks, while also highlighting the importance of whistleblowers and witnesses like Elena, who were willing to risk their lives to expose criminal activities. Elena's transformation from academic translator to international intelligence asset was inspiring other individuals with specialized knowledge to cooperate with law enforcement agencies. Elena's protection operation continued during Operation Polyglot, with assassination attempts escalating as criminal organizations recognized that her intelligence was enabling the systematic destruction of their enterprises. The sophistication of these attacks was requiring constant adaptation of security protocols and the deployment of military-level resources to ensure Elena's survival as she continued to provide crucial intelligence for ongoing operations. The financial impact of Operation Polyglot exceeded $50 billion in seized criminal assets, disrupted illegal transactions, and prevented criminal activities, demonstrating the enormous economic benefits of comprehensive international law enforcement cooperation. Elena's intelligence had enabled law enforcement agencies to target criminal networks with precision that maximized operational effectiveness, while minimizing the resources required for investigation and prosecution. The humanitarian impact of Operation Polyglot included the rescue of thousands of human trafficking victims, the protection of indigenous communities threatened by illegal mining operations, and the prevention of terrorist attacks that had been planned using weapons obtained through illegal trafficking networks. Elena's intelligence had enabled law enforcement agencies to prioritize operations that protected vulnerable populations while simultaneously targeting criminal enterprises. Operation Polyglot was establishing Elena as the most successful intelligence asset in law enforcement history, but her ongoing value was creating pressure for even more sophisticated protection measures as criminal organizations demonstrated their willingness to deploy unlimited resources to eliminate the source of intelligence that was destroying their operations. Elena's survival had become essential not only for her personal safety but for the continuing success of international efforts to combat organized crime. The specially constructed Linguistic Analysis Center at the FBI's Quantico facility represented the most advanced language processing environment ever created. Designed specifically to maximize Elena's hyperpolyglot capabilities while providing comprehensive security against the increasingly sophisticated assassination attempts that threatened her life daily. The chamber was equipped with acoustic isolation systems, electromagnetic shielding, and advanced recording equipment that could capture and analyze Elena's multilingual communications with unprecedented precision and clarity. Elena's daily routine in the analysis center involved processing thousands of intercepted communications from criminal organizations around the world. using her unique neurological capabilities to detect coordination patterns and strategic planning that conventional translation services missed entirely. Her brain had become the primary intelligence processing system for a global network of law enforcement agencies that relied on her linguistic expertise to understand criminal activities spanning multiple languages, cultures, and continents simultaneously. The breakthrough that transformed Elena from a protected witness into the world's most valuable intelligence asset occurred when she began demonstrating the ability to predict criminal activities by analyzing subtle linguistic patterns in intercepted communications that indicated planning stages of operations that had not yet been implemented. Elena's hyperpolyglot brain was functioning as an early warning system that could identify emerging threats days or weeks before conventional intelligence analysis would detect them. Dr. Mitchell's neurological studies of Elena's linguistic processing revealed that her brain was developing new neural pathways that allowed her to maintain conscious awareness of multiple language streams while unconsciously processing additional linguistic information that influenced her predictive capabilities. Elena's brain was evolving in real time, adapting to the demands of processing massive amounts of multilingual intelligence with accuracy that exceeded computer-based translation and analysis systems. Elena's prediction capabilities were first demonstrated when she warned law enforcement agencies about a planned terrorist attack in Paris that was being coordinated through communications in Arabic, French, and English that appeared unrelated when analyzed separately, but revealed a clear operational plan when processed by Elena's multilingual cognition. The successful prevention of this attack established Elena's credibility as a predictive intelligence asset rather than simply a reactive translator. The international intelligence community was beginning to recognize that Elena's capabilities represented a new form of human intelligence gathering that could revolutionize counterterrorism, organized crime investigation, and national security operations. Requests for Elena's analytical services were coming from governments across 6 continents, but her protection requirements and the political sensitivity of her revelations were limiting access to her capabilities. Elena's analysis of criminal communications was revealing that organized crime enterprises were developing new operational security measures specifically designed to counter her linguistic capabilities, including the use of artificial languages, mathematical codes, and cultural references that required extensive contextual knowledge to interpret accurately. Criminal organizations were adapting their communication methods in response to Elena's demonstrated ability to penetrate their linguistic security measures. The counter-adaptation by criminal organizations was creating an intellectual arms race between Elena's evolving capabilities and their developing countermeasures, with each side demonstrating increasingly sophisticated approaches to information security and penetration. Elena's linguistic expertise was being supplemented by cultural studies, mathematical analysis, and psychological profiling that allowed her to understand criminal communications even when they employed advanced encryption or coding techniques. Elena's predictions were becoming increasingly specific and accurate, enabling law enforcement agencies to prevent dozens of criminal operations, including arms trafficking, drug smuggling, human trafficking, money laundering, and terrorist attacks. Her success rate was approaching 95%, a level of accuracy that was transforming international law enforcement strategy and creating dependence on her capabilities that concerned security officials responsible for her protection. The political implications of Elena's intelligence were becoming increasingly complex as her revelations exposed criminal activities that involved government officials, intelligence agencies, and international organizations that had previously been considered trustworthy allies. Elena's analysis was forcing diplomatic realignments and creating tensions between countries that were discovering their officials had been compromised by criminal organizations. Elena's personal transformation from academic translator to global intelligence asset was taking a psychological toll that concerned her protection team and the medical personnel monitoring her health. The constant pressure of processing criminal intelligence, surviving assassination attempts, and bearing responsibility for international security operations was creating stress levels that threatened her long-term cognitive stability and physical health. Dr. Walsh, the former Blackridge researcher who had become Elena's primary medical advisor, was documenting the neurological changes that Elena's brain was undergoing as it adapted to processing massive amounts of multilingual information under extreme stress conditions. Walsh's research was revealing that Elena's capabilities were continuing to evolve, but also that the human brain might have limits that could be exceeded if Elena's workload continued to increase. Elena's requests for increased protection of criminal victims and enhanced international cooperation were influencing law enforcement priorities beyond simple prosecution and asset seizure to include humanitarian operations and long-term crime prevention strategies. Elena's perspective as a linguistic analyst was providing insights into the social and cultural factors that enabled criminal organizations to operate across international boundaries. The success of operations based on Elena's intelligence was creating political pressure for governments to provide her with enhanced resources and expanded authority to direct international law enforcement activities. Elena was becoming not only an intelligence asset but also a policy influence whose recommendations were shaping international approaches to organized crime, terrorism, and corruption. Elena's chamber had become the nerve center for global law enforcement operations, with secure communication links connecting her to police agencies, intelligence services, and military organizations on every continent. Her linguistic analysis was providing real-time intelligence that enabled coordinated responses to criminal activities faster than any previous intelligence-gathering method had achieved. The realization that Elena's capabilities were irreplaceable was creating concerns about succession planning and the development of similar capabilities in other individuals. Research programs were being established to identify and train other hyperpolyglot individuals, but Elena's unique combination of linguistic ability, cultural knowledge, and analytical intelligence appeared to be impossible to replicate through conventional training methods. Elena's chamber represented the future of international intelligence cooperation, demonstrating how linguistic expertise could be applied to solve global security challenges that had previously seemed intractable. Her success was inspiring new approaches to intelligence gathering, international cooperation, and the application of human cognitive capabilities to complex analytical problems that exceeded the capacity of technological solutions. The discovery of the ultimate conspiracy came when Elena's linguistic analysis revealed that several of the criminal organizations she had been investigating were actually controlled by a single coordinating entity that had been manipulating international law enforcement responses to protect its core operations while sacrificing peripheral criminal enterprises as diversions. Elena's hyperpolyglot capabilities detected coordination patterns and communications across multiple levels that revealed a meta-conspiracy designed to use her own intelligence against the law enforcement agencies that were protecting her, which Elena's analysis identified as the synthesis had been established by former intelligence operatives from multiple countries who had created a private intelligence and criminal enterprise that transcended national boundaries and traditional law enforcement jurisdictions. The synthesis had been manipulating Elena's revelations to eliminate competitor criminal organizations while protecting their own operations and expanding their influence within government and law enforcement agencies. Elena's analysis revealed that the synthesis had been using the information from her multilingual records to predict and counter law enforcement operations, selectively protecting certain criminal enterprises, while allowing others to be exposed and eliminated. The organization possessed intelligence capabilities that exceeded many national security agencies and had been infiltrating law enforcement operations through corrupt officials who provided real-time intelligence about investigations and protection operations. The revelation that Elena's intelligence was being systematically compromised forced federal agencies to acknowledge that the synthesis had penetrated their security systems and was manipulating international law enforcement operations for their own strategic advantage. Elena's most sensitive intelligence had been
accessible to the very criminal organization that she was supposed to be helping law enforcement agencies combat, creating a fundamental compromise of operational security. Dr. Mitchell's analysis of communication patterns revealed that the synthesis had been coordinating the assassination attempts against Elena not to eliminate her, but to maintain her protection status and ensure her continued cooperation with law enforcement agencies that were unknowingly serving the organization's interests. The sophisticated nature of the assassination attempts had been designed to fail while creating the appearance of serious threats that justified Elena's continued protection and utilization as an intelligence asset. Elena's discovery of the synthesis manipulation created a crisis of trust between her and the federal agencies that had been protecting her, as she realized that her intelligence had been used to eliminate criminal competitors while strengthening the very organization that had been responsible for Ambassador Chen's assassination. Elena's cooperation had been systematically exploited to serve criminal interests while creating the appearance of successful law enforcement operations. The scope of the synthesis influence extended beyond criminal enterprises to include corruption within intelligence agencies, law enforcement organizations, and international institutions that had been coordinating responses to Elena's revelations. The organization had been using Elena's intelligence to identify and eliminate honest officials while protecting and promoting corrupt personnel who served their interests within legitimate government institutions. Elena's analysis of the synthesis communications revealed that the organization was planning to eliminate her. Once she had served her purpose of eliminating competitor criminal enterprises and identifying honest law enforcement personnel who posed threats to their infiltration of government institutions, Elena's usefulness to the synthesis was approaching its limit, and the organization was preparing to end her life while ensuring that her death appeared to be the result of assassination by the criminal organizations she had been helping to eliminate. The realization that she had been systematically manipulated transformed Elena from a cooperative intelligence asset into an adversary determined to expose and eliminate the synthesis before they could complete their plan to eliminate her and consolidate their control over international criminal enterprises. Elena's linguistic capabilities, which had been used against her enemies, would now be directed against the organization that had been exploiting her intelligence for their own purposes. Elena's counterintelligence operation required her to continue appearing cooperative with federal agencies while secretly gathering intelligence about the synthesis infiltration of law enforcement organizations and planning operations to expose their corruption and eliminate their leadership. Elena's hyperpolyglot capabilities allowed her to detect the synthesis communications that were being transmitted through channels that federal agencies were monitoring without realizing their significance. The development of Elena's counter-strategy involved using her linguistic analysis to identify honest law enforcement personnel who could be trusted to act against the synthesis without compromising the operation to corrupt officials who were secretly serving the organization's interests. Elena's ability to analyze communication patterns and psychological profiles enabled her to distinguish between honest and corrupt officials with accuracy that exceeded conventional internal investigation methods. Elena's exposure of the synthesis required her to simultaneously reveal the organization's existence, document their infiltration of law enforcement agencies, identify their corrupt officials, and coordinate operations to arrest their leadership before they could implement their plan to eliminate her and consolidate their criminal empire. The complexity of this operation exceeded anything that Elena had previously attempted and required her to function as a one-person counterintelligence agency. The international implications of the synthesis revelation were staggering, as Elena's analysis revealed that the organization had been manipulating global law enforcement operations for over a decade, using their intelligence capabilities to eliminate competitors while expanding their own criminal enterprises and government influence. The organization represented a new form of transnational threat that combined criminal enterprise with intelligence capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of national governments. Elena's final gambit involved using her position within the Federal Protection Operation to coordinate simultaneous operations against DeSantis's leadership in 17 different countries, while simultaneously exposing their infiltration of law enforcement agencies and providing evidence of their criminal activities to honest officials who could act without compromising the operations to corrupt personnel serving the organization's interests. The success of Elena's counter-operation would determine not only her survival, but also the future of international law enforcement cooperation and the integrity of government institutions that had been systematically infiltrated by the synthesis over the course of more than a decade. Elena's linguistic capabilities, which had made her the most valuable intelligence asset in history, would now be tested in the most complex and dangerous operation of her career. Elena's transformation from protected witness to active counterintelligence operative represented the ultimate evolution of her capabilities, from passive linguistic analysis to active strategic operations that would determine the outcome of the greatest criminal conspiracy in modern history. The woman who had started as an academic translator was about to become the architect of the largest counterintelligence operation ever attempted by a single individual. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.